Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh, and very good morning to all of you. First of all, my name is Mazlan Hussein. I'm a partner and head of Islamic Financial Services Practice Group in Zaid Ibrahim & Co. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Labuan IBFC in the first place for working with us to develop and promote standardized ijarah or Islamic leasing legal documentation, which is tailor-made for the development of ijarah businesses, in particular for Labuan IBFC. But because it is also benchmarked against the best standards that are available out there, including the concept paper on ijarah issued by Bank Negara Malaysia, as well as the Baltic and International Maritime Organization, or BIMCO, standard documentation, which are very commonly used amongst ship leasing players in the market. We hope that this would further expand the feasibility and availability of ijarah or Islamic leasing as a product, especially in Labuan and if possible elsewhere. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for sacrificing your valuable time to be with us today. It is very heartening to see the support that you have given to this seminar. I hope that although it's going to be a very short session for you to fully understand and appreciate the initiative that has been taken by Labuan IBFC in standardizing ijarah documents, but at least, hopefully, it will also spur your interest and inquisitiveness to further discuss this product in the market and spread the word around, so that since this is only the beginning, this is only an initial pioneering work, we hope that the standardized documentation will continue to be improved based on market experience, based on your experience, and we can continue to work together to develop this market. I'm sure most of you, especially Prof, who is one of the pioneers of the Islamic finance industry in Malaysia, are very well versed with ijarah, if not the term, perhaps some of the transactions that have been taking place and its Sharia principles. But to be fair to some of you, some of the members of the audience who may not be yet familiar with ijarah, I hope that the rest of you can bear with me in terms of accommodating the understanding, and we should try to start from the beginning so that at the end of this session, I hope that in terms of the take back, you would appreciate that ijarah is pretty much similar to conventional leasing in various aspects. In other words, if you have been familiar with conventional leasing, then you should not have too much problem understanding ijarah. But at the same time, what you would need to appreciate is that there would be some peculiarities or some specificities that differentiate between Islamic leasing and conventional leasing. We hope to finish that in the first session. There are about 27 slides that I would like to cover, and then after the break, half an hour break, we will zoom into the standardized documentation itself, whereby there are two versions, the simplified version as well as the more detailed version, and these are to accommodate actual business practices out there, and we hope that you'll be able to take back something from there. What is ijarah? To begin with, of course, ijarah literally means leasing, or hiring, or renting out. Under the new legal framework for Labuan businesses, which was reformed in 2010, although that has been 5 years ago, but relatively still new, considering that Labuan initial legal framework was first initiated in 1990. So there have been 20 years since it was first passed. There are clearer regulatory and legal framework to accommodate expansion of both conventional leasing and Islamic leasing businesses. Labuan in this respect is quite special compared to any other international offshore jurisdiction, whereby it has positioned itself by tailoring its legal framework, not only benchmarking it against some of the best jurisdictions out there, including Cayman Island, British Virgin Island, Bahamas, Bermuda, but also coming up with innovation in terms of legislation that caters specifically for Islamic businesses. So you have, on the one hand, for conventional businesses, the Labuan Financial Services and Securities Act 2010, or LFSSA, and on the other hand, you also have a tailor-made legislation, which are a counterpart to that legislation, called Labuan Islamic Financial Services and Securities Act 2010. This enables Labuan to undertake both conventional leasing business as well as Islamic leasing business. Let us not forget that Labuan Financial Services Authority also have its own Sharia Advisory Council that ensures that the regulatory authorities in Labuan are properly advised and informed of Sharia compliance and governance aspects of Islamic businesses in Labuan, and therefore this again put Labuan in a very unique position compared to any other offshore jurisdictions out there when it comes to promoting Islamic businesses or Sharia compliance businesses. As I've mentioned earlier, ijarah literally means leasing or hiring. It is a Sharia compliant arrangement where the contract is entered into to ensure that commercially one is able, as an asset owner, to generate income, i.e. the rental income from its asset, without having to depart with its rightful ownership of that asset. And the customer is able to make use or utilize or benefit from the usufruct or the usefulness of the asset owned by another without having to bear the risk associated with the ownership of that asset. Just to exemplify, for example, if you buy outright a house, basically you have to take full risk and liabilities associated with that house, including paying all the insurance coverage, paying for the quit rents and all the taxes associated with that property. But if you only rent it, you are only liable to pay for the rental, as well as some of the utilities that you use when you are renting that property. In other words, you are not liable to cover or to pay for the risk associated with the ownership. The risk associated with the ownership remains with the owner or the property owner of that house. So this is where, to a certain extent, it also allows parties to leverage on their own financial resources and optimize what they can do with or without ownership of asset. In terms of the process itself, very similar to any conventional leasing. It starts with the lessor possessing an asset or owning an asset, whether legally or beneficially. And then he identifies or come across a lessee who agrees to take possession and make use of that asset. In other words, throughout the tenure of the lease, the lessee will be holding possession and taking control of the asset, although ownership remains with the lessor. But in terms of control and possession and use of the benefit of the asset, it will be with the lessee, in consideration to fulfill the requirement under the Contracts Act. Basically, in consideration of that usage, the lessee will pay rental for the duration or tenure of the possession, and by the end of the contract, the rental payment will be stopped and possession of that asset will be returned to the lessor. Very simple, very straightforward. Up to this stage, still very similar to conventional lease. Now, let us encroach slowly into the differentiation between Islamic and conventional lease. When it comes to ijarah, what we need to understand, there will be certain conditions, certain parameters that need to be fulfilled to comply with what ijarah considers as ownership, with what ijarah considers as adequate rental or adequate consideration, complies with what Syariah considers as appropriate clarity or certainty in the contract. In the Syariah term or Islamic law terminology, there is a concept called gharar or uncertainty, which must be removed before an ijarah contract or any muawadat, commercial contract, can be considered as legal or legitimate. So to this extent, there are some additional issues that we will need to be aware of to comply and satisfy the Sharia requirement for leasing. Coming back to my slide, the right to use the object is transferred to the lessee or the hirer, not its ownership, and therefore, as far as the essence of the contract is concerned, this contract is the type where there is a sale of the lawful usufruct or usefulness of the object, not the sale of the object itself. In other words, again, just to illustrate, as far as ijarah is concerned, especially the classical context, actually, in many occasions or in many instances, our services, for example, I'm a lawyer, I sell services, so I sell the benefit of my work or the benefit of my profession. I don't sell myself, I'm not a slave, but I sell the benefit of my services, and for that people pay me fees. The fees in Syariah term is called ujur, which is the root word for ijarah, and therefore after the completion of my service or the completion of the tenure of my service, then that ends the contractual relationship between my hirer, my client and myself. So that you need to fully understand. Via the Sharia principle of ijarah, this allows letting and also subletting, depending on the terms set out by the original owner of the asset, whether he allows subletting of asset or not. But commercially speaking, there is no Sharia restriction in the first place for you to sublet assets if it is permitted by the owner. In particular, an ijarah contract, to this extent, to satisfy the general parameters of the Sharia, must be free from the elements of riba. Riba literally refers to interest or usury, which is quite common in conventional leasing, especially when you come across financial lease, penalties or interest. In fact, compounding interest can be imposed for delay in rental payment. But in ijarah, you cannot do that. There is a specific restriction against implementation or application of riba in contract of ijarah. I've mentioned about gharar. To be more specific, there are permissible gharar and there are impermissible gharar within the context of Sharia. What is meant by, although gharar still literally means uncertainty, as far as the application is concerned, there are permissible gharar. Permissible gharar basically is associated with risks which are inherent to the asset. For example, every asset, no matter what, for example, ships or aircraft or buildings that you rent out, there is always a risk inherent with it that it may become damaged. Although you may put in a lot of risk infrastructure or risk management infrastructure to minimize or mitigate the risk of it being damaged, for example, putting in insurance coverage or maintenance services, but the risk is always there. So there is no harm or there is no restriction for an asset to be carrying inherent risk. What is not permissible under ijarah contract or Sharia contract generally is the type of gharar that is dubiously incorporated into the contract by the parties to gain advantage against the counterparty. That kind of gharar is not permissible under Sharia. Just to give you an example, the Sharia is very peculiar and very careful when it comes to certainty in order to ensure fairness and transparency to parties who are contracting. In the classical books that discuss about muawadat or contractual or commercial contracts, it even illustrates that, for example, when you go to the market and you say you want to buy watermelons, you go to a watermelon stall and says to the owner, I want to buy watermelons, and he asks you which one, and you say whichever that you prefer. From a strict Sharia interpretation of gharar, this type of contract is impermissible because there is uncertainty as to which watermelon are you contracting for. You must specifically agree. For example, as a stall owner must be cautious enough to pick a watermelon and show to you, can this be the one that you take? Yes, I agree. Then only the gharar is removed. There must be specific, identification of the underlying asset or underlying item that are contracted under the sale. So you cannot, for example, take it lightly that the certainty of underlying asset, certainty of term, certainty of the pricing or the rental amount has to be there when it comes to ijarah, because Sharia is very strict on these terms. Finally, one of the important parameters that has to be avoided is maisir, or betting, gambling component or element within any Sharia contract. What is meant by this is not the betting or the gambling that you usually do when you go to the casino or to the Magnum shops, or the maybe the horse racing stadiums. These are maisir whereby there are uncertainty to the pricing, for example, of the rental. For example, a very classical type of betting that happens commercially in the market, in the financial market, is basically conventional insurance contract. What is meant by betting here is that since under conventional insurance contract, it is a risk transfer contract, whereby a customer come to the insurer saying that I will pay you this premium. For this premium, if an insurable event happen, I will get the full insurance coverage. If it doesn't happen, you get to take away my premium. So from a Sharia point of view, this type of contract is an outright maisir, an outright betting, because it is dependable on an event which is not certain whether it happens or not, and either party will be gaining. Either the customer gains the full amount of the coverage at the disadvantage of the insurer, or the insurer gaining the premium of the insurance cover at the disadvantage of the customer. So this type of maisir happens in variety of forms in the modern financial marketplace, and the Sharia also again is careful with this. They actually prohibit it from Sharia compliant contracts, including ijarah, which means that if, for example, you enter into an ijarah contract, the preference is to enter for insurance cover is actually by using takaful coverage rather than insurance, because conventional insurance is considered as non-Sharia compliant outright from the Sharia point of view. By having these activities, we hope to expand leasing business activity to a segment of the market that are inclined towards or committed to the adherence of Sharia rules and principles. As you are aware, especially in Malaysia, whereby we are a leading Islamic financial center, not only regionally but perhaps internationally as well, arguably there are so many players, including Islamic leasing companies, Islamic banks, Islamic takaful companies, Islamic funds such as Tabung Haji and other types of major funds in Malaysia which have dedicated size of funds towards Islamic finance activities. So these are ripe market for you to tap to expand your business activity using or utilizing a market segment that are inclined or committed to adherence with Sharia principles. To this extent, arguably, again, it allows you to expand beyond the conventional market that are already existing in place, especially if you consider that it is already saturated. Let us also not forget that internationally, ijarah is very widely popular and acceptable amongst Sharia scholars around the world, and therefore can be easily replicated in jurisdictions beyond Malaysia. In almost every countries which have Islamic finance activities, ijarah have been used compared to some of the types of Islamic contract that we have in Malaysia, which may not be acceptable to some other countries in the Middle East. But ijarah has always been the one widely recognized and popular among all major jurisdictions with presence of Islamic finance. So what are the pillars? What are the arkan of Syariah contract? Ijarah contract. We need to understand within these parameters or these criteria, they need to comply with all of the preconditions. You cannot just satisfy a few and consider it as Syariah compliant or a complete ijarah. You have to satisfy with all conditions, whether in terms of the set of the documentation of the agreement, the proper conditions satisfied by the underlying asset, as well as the terms when it comes to rental payment, the tenure, so on and so forth. Then only it will be recognized as a complete Sharia compliant and satisfactory ijarah. Let us go to the agreement first. What are the essence of the contract? As per all contracts, including ijarah contracts, as far as the legal framework is concerned, this is governed by the Malaysian Contracts Act 1950. What are, for most of you who are lawyers, you would recall what are the basic ingredients of contract? Basically, offer, acceptance, consideration, and there must be clarity, clarity in the contract to the extent that it is also must be compliant with law. You cannot enter into contracts for illegal purpose or illegitimate purpose. So to this extent, again, a lot of similarities with conventional leasing. However, there are certain components that have to be incorporated into the agreement to ensure that it is going to be Sharia compliant. What are the key ingredients? Firstly, when it comes to reciprocal of promises of the contracting parties, the offer and acceptance. In the Sharia term, the ijab and the kabul, just like when you are entering into a contract of marriage. Ijab and kabul ni more in Malaysia more often used only during nikah or marriage contract, but as a matter of factly, every offer and acceptance that constitute a contract from Sharia term is called ijab and kabul. So there must be reciprocal promises between the contracting parties. It cannot be unilateral contract whereby one party agree and the other does not. It must be given at free will, not under fraud, misrepresentation or undue influence. This is similar to what is restricted under Contract Act as well. For lawful purpose, in this respect, when it comes to lawful, it must be for Sharia compliant purpose as well. For example, you cannot, rent out a warehouse for the purpose of, when you know that the purpose of the renting will be for brewery or making of alcohol drinks. Cannot. That is non-Sharia compliant purpose, and basically from Sharia perspective, the rental income that you will derive from that lease will be non-Sharia compliant and therefore not recognized as Sharia compliant income. So lawful purpose, not only lawful under the law but lawful under Sharia as well. To this extent, most parties who are not familiar with ijarah may need to be guided by proper advice, Syariah scholars' advice. This is something that should be carefully and duly considered by any parties who want to embark on ijarah. Between the parties, they must have proper legal capacity to give those promises. During the classical era of practicing commercial contracts like this, basically amongst the legal capacity includes baligh, having reached the maturity age. But of course, in the commercial sense, in the modern day today, this refer more towards the legal capacity in terms of the legal powers and the mandates under the constitutional documents of the parties. So this has to be complied with. Excuse me. If you are a lessor, what do you need to be aware of? You are the lessor, you are the asset owner. What do you need to be aware of for you to satisfy the preconditions for ijarah? Firstly, there must be rightful possession and ownership, whether legal or beneficial, before ijarah agreement is made effective. You cannot be renting out something that you do not own. The legal maxim in this respect, there is a specific legal maxim in Sharia that says you cannot sell something that you do not own. In the classical illustration written in fiqh books, they give the example of selling fruits that are still not yet on the trees. You cannot sell something that you do not own. How do you sell birds that are still flying in the sky? Cannot. Or sell fish that are still swimming in the ocean? Cannot. You cannot sell anything that you have not owned yet. Similarly, you cannot lease out anything that you have not owned. You must have taken whether legal or beneficial position, ownership, before you enter into an ijarah. The cost of the ownership, such as taxation, insurance, takaful obligation just now, as I've mentioned, all the costs associated, risks and liabilities associated with ownership are the lessor's responsibility. You must take care of it, and you must continue to be obliged to it until the end of the tenure of the ijarah. If you, for example, decide that at the end of the tenure of the ijarah, the asset will be sold or transferred to the lessee, then of course your obligation as owner also stops there, because there is a transfer of ownership. But as long as there has not been transfer of ownership, you shall continue to be obliged by that risk. Because again, the justification for this, there is a commonly known legal maxim in Sharia that says al-ghurum bil ghunum. Gain is justified by taking risk. Al-ghurum bil ghunum. The legitimacy of gaining something is by taking risk. So you cannot, for example, become an owner but pass on all risk to your lessee without taking any risk or obligation or liabilities. Cannot. Under the Sharia, cannot. Under conventional, maybe there are many attempts or many ways of transferring those risks to other parties, of waiving your original liabilities or risks, but under ijarah you cannot do that, because al-ghurum bil ghunum. Gain is justified by taking risk. Finally, delivery of asset to the lessee on time for appropriate utilization as agreed in the contract, without delivering the asset to be used by the lessee. Remember that the consideration for the rental is the lessee having access to utilize the benefit of the asset. So if you have not delivered your part of the contract, you have not complied with the requirements of a lessor, and the lessee therefore would have every right to terminate the contract, even unilaterally, because you have not delivered your part of the contract. Of course, under the contract, as we may see later on, there can be a pre-agreement for that delivery of the asset to be taking place in the future, but at the end of the day, it must take place. Otherwise, it will not be a complete or satisfactory ijarah contract. There must be due consideration for that. The lessor can further claim compensation since I've earlier mentioned that you cannot impose riba, you cannot impose interest or usury penalty for delay in payment. Wow, how do you how do you mitigate your risk then, especially if there is a delay in payment by the hirer? Yeah. From Syariah perspective, the lessor can claim actual compensation for genuine loss or genuine expenses that it has incurred due to lessee's misconduct or negligence, delay in payments, intentionally or deliberately causing damage to the underlying asset. All that you can claim compensation for, but it has to be proven. Yeah, these are based on evidence. You cannot simply impose or pre-impose charges without taking any risk or without actual damage being done, because again that would be considered as unlawful gain or equivalent to riba. The lessor must respect the lessee's right to quiet possession and enjoyment in the use of this asset. In other words, it cannot be an artificial renting out or letting go. On the one hand, you rent it out and therefore lessee will be paying consideration, paying rental to you, but there are so many restrictions which at the end of the day, it is as good as the lessee not benefiting anything from it. This is what I would consider as artificial consideration of letting go or renting out, and this is again not satisfactory from Syariah perspective. It has to be satisfied. This is what I mentioned just now. As far as evidence is concerned, lessor must prove that the expenses, whenever they want to recover any compensation, must be due to lessee's misconduct or negligence. If it is due to act of God, for example, force majeure, that causes damage to the property, then the lessor are not entitled to claim compensation from the lessee. On the contrary, it may be the case that the lessor is the one who have to pay compensation for the lessee, because the lessee can no longer now use or make use of the usufruct of the underlying asset. So this we need to be very clear when we are a lessor. Now, when it comes to documentation and you are a lessee, you are the hirer, what are the parameters that you need to be aware of? What are the conditions that lessee have to be in for it to comply with the requirements of ijarah document? Firstly, it has the responsibility to indemnify the lessor for any liability, cost or damage caused by his own misuse of the asset. And I've mentioned this earlier. Therefore, to avoid from having to pay that compensation or indemnify the lessor for such damage, he must continue to take reasonable care of the usage or utilization of the asset. In other words, if at the end of the tenure, he will be passing back the asset to the owner, it has to be passed back on wear and tear acceptable basis, but not in any worse damage basis. Otherwise, again, they will have to incur the indemnity for causing damage to the asset. Any expenses to maintain the usufruct or utilization of the asset, such as just now I've mentioned the utility bills, the electricity, the water, telephone, that you have to bear yourself, because that is not part of the liability or risk of the ownership of the property by the owner. Since you are the one who utilizes all those benefits, you have to pay the fee for it. And unless stipulated otherwise, the usage must be for prescribed lawful purpose only. I've mentioned this earlier. This is associated with my earlier slides, which in this respect again also have to be borne. We have also to bear in mind that subletting is restricted based on the conditions imposed by the lessor. Yeah. So since you are not the owner, you cannot, as you wish or at your own will, sublet with separate conditions that may contradict with the terms that may have been set out by the lessor. If, for example, the usufruct is not available within the lease period, the lessee has to be given the option of either terminating the contract or request for a replacement of the lease usufruct. So as a lessee, you must be aware of this benefit. Either you terminate, this is your right. You have the right to terminate because you have not been given the benefit of the usufruct, or you have the right to demand for a replacement. Although in the contract it's already identified that this is the property or this is the asset and it has to be delivered to you according to this time, but if it is not, it is your unilateral choice whether for it to be replaced or not with an asset of equivalent quality. If, for example, there is any loss or impairment of the lease asset, the lessee must prove that there is no misconduct, negligence or breach of specified terms on his part. So in other words, the balance of proof, the obligation to prove who causes the damage is fair here. Both parties need to be able to show that the damage is either caused by the counterparty or not. Let us now look into a more illustrative example. Let's say we undertake a shipping ijara. I'm sure some of you perhaps may have undertaken conventional ship leasing and you are very familiar with it. So some of the process there you may find very similar to conventional. But now, since you have learned some of the parameters required by ijara, let's try to apply it in a typical shipping lease. As I've said, the lessor must already have ownership of the ship before its commitment to deliver under the ijara arrives. In other words, what is meant by having ownership before leasing is that you may enter into an agreement, an ijara agreement today. You may agree in that agreement that you will deliver the ship sometime in the future. But let's say when you are entering into the agreement, you have yet to possess ownership of the ship. Then you must not start charging the rental until you have obtained possession of the ship. Okay, that you need to be very clear, because renting out, the actual activity of renting out and raising the obligation of paying rental can only be triggered once possession have already taken place on the part of the lessor. So by the time, let's say you want to lock in the customer early, although you don't have your ship yet, you want to lock in the customer early, you can enter into an ijara agreement with him, but it must be clearly prescribed that you have this obligation to own that ship before the rental period starts. So in that case, you would have a bit of time to secure your ownership of ship before the tenure of the rental starts. So the lessor then must be able to deliver the ship to the lessee for use at the agreed time. The lessee will use the ship with reasonable care for a fixed period and pay rental income to the lessor. The lessee will also perform regular service or maintenance of the ship to ensure good condition, since he is the one who make use of the ship. So regular service and maintenance is his obligation. Although, for example, licensing fee, registration fee, whatever other fees or risks associated with ownership remains with the lessor. The lessor has no right to disrupt the lessee's lawful use of the ship in any way. This again has to be Sharia compliant. For example, if you know that the ship will be used for non-Sharia compliant parties, for example, then you cannot allow it to be rented out to that lessee. Similarly, if you know that it will be used to, for example, do human smuggling or human trafficking, again, not only it is unlawful under the law, but it is also considered unlawful under the Sharia. So you cannot lease to such parties. However, if there is any serious damage to the ship during the period of the ijara attributed to the lessee's fault, then the lessor has a right to claim compensation from the lessee. Again, let us not forget, there are so many other factors that come in when it comes to risk of a ship at sea. For example, attack by pirates, typhoon, and many other risks. All these risks has to be carefully provided for and managed by both parties in the contract, so that they are very clear that they are compliant with the requirement of the law as well as the Sharia, and avoid any future dispute. Again, this the intention here is to ensure that there will not be dubious ambiguity whereby certain parties specifically or deliberately leave some terms undefined or some conditions unprovided for to his own advantage. That is not permissible under Sharia. So we have mentioned about the obligation of the lessor, obligation of the lessee. Now we go to the asset. What kind of asset are permissible under Ijarah? As previously illustrated, I have mentioned about properties, ships. This is very clear-cut case. In probably more recent times, there have been more activities of licensing out copyrights or licensing out IT solutions. That is, with all due respect, again, a feasible type of asset for Ijarah, which is very useful to this extent, because there is, of course, a fast-growing IT-based economy or IT-based activities in the industry, and Ijarah can actually be used for this type of asset. So the document of Ijarah must be able to clearly identify the object which the benefit is attached to, so that both parties are clear that it is in existence, therefore the benefit can be passed on. The identity of that object is capable of being reasonably and lawfully utilized. If, for example, it is so badly damaged, it is in existence, it is identifiable, but it is so badly damaged to the extent that it is not reasonably or lawfully utilizable. So you need to be careful, because this may not comply with Ijarah. It would again look pretty much like an artificial Ijarah. Finally, the benefit of that usufruct has to be legitimate under Sharia. I've mentioned a few examples earlier on what are the types of activities that may not be considered Sharia compliant. Let us go back to our shipping Ijarah example. So, going by these parameters, the ship must be in existence. It cannot be a ship which is still under construction, a ship which is still in the dock, which are still under repair, or a ship which is only half ready, in other words, not fit for the sea. Cannot. It has to fulfill all these requirements for the usufruct to be passed on, for the benefit to be usable. The purpose of the usage of the ship cannot contravene Sharia, as this will affect legality or halalness of the rental income generated. Why there is a prohibition against non-Sharia compliant activities on the ship itself, as far as the income is concerned? This is to ensure that the lessor will be generating halal income or permissible income from the renting out, and the lessee must be allowed to have reasonable and lawful use of the ship. So when we document the Ijarah contract, when it comes to the asset, it must properly reflect that the lease object or the asset, whether it is physical or non-physical asset. For example, just now I've already illustrated a non-physical asset, which is copyright. You can lease it out. Or IT solution, which you can utilize for certain tenure. So that asset cannot be a perishable asset, or which is a debt in nature. In other words, financial asset from a strict Sharia perspective cannot be used as underlying asset for Ijarah. This is a key differentiation that we must understand when it comes to Ijarah. Financial asset, especially debt, cannot be used as the underlying asset. The asset cannot be defective to the extent that it is losing its essential value. I've illustrated just now with regard to the ship. And the asset must be actually and lawfully attainable. Even, for example, if the asset is, for example, confiscated by the authorities for investigation, and therefore its usufruct or its benefit cannot be utilized, still such restriction would render it as not fit for an ijarah, therefore it cannot be used for ijarah purposes. That is not the type of asset that satisfy ijarah when it comes to documentation. So an ijarah finance document. When you want to use ijarah as a method of financing, the parties must specify that the terms with certainty will be without dubious ambiguity. For example, hidden costs. This is again another classical example on how gharar comes about in commercial contracts, including ijarah. For example, hidden costs. Very typical example, of course, is compounding interest, which means that the interest charges would never end as long as you have not paid it. So you never know. You never, until you actually pay, you never know what is the final quantum. That kind of gharar, that kind of dubious ambiguity is not permissible under ijarah. Unilateral revision of rental rates. A term that incorporates that you can unilaterally revise the rate, also not permissible, because it creates an ambiguity as to what is the actual price of the contract, what is the actual rental amount. So this we need to be cautious about, because I'm sure quite often it may be doable or permissible under conventional lease contract, but as a matter of fact, it is not permissible under ijarah. What else need to be certain? We have discussed the lessor, we have discussed the lessee, we have discussed the asset. Now, what about the certainty, the level of certainty required under ijarah? We have covered that to a certain extent, but let's look more closer on that. Firstly, the period for usage must be fixed and agreed upon. You cannot, for example, move the goalpost in terms of the tenure. It keeps changing from time to time, unless it is agreed by the parties mutually. That's different. But for you to unilaterally incorporate a term where you can revise the term on your own, that is not permissible. Renewal terms as well must be clear and agreed upon. It cannot be left uncertain, because otherwise you have to enter into a fresh ijarah contract from scratch. Then the right to sublease, if any, must be appropriate within the original usage period. In other words, the life tenure of that asset. For example, it cannot go beyond the life tenure of the asset itself just for the sake of earning rental income. Cannot. It has to reflect that utilization period of the asset as well as the value of the current ijarah. So this restriction under Sharia is imposed to avoid, among others, the lessee from over-leveraging on the asset. Because over-leveraging also is not permissible under Sharia. Although I've said from the beginning that al-ghurm bil-ghunum, gain is justified by taking risk, but this is not the type of risk that is permissible under Sharia, because it has gone to the extent of betting or gambling. It has gone into the level of maisir, whereby you over-leverage on the same asset over and over again, hoping that the value will go up and you earn additional rental income beyond what is appropriate for that asset. So this again, many people or many practitioners who have been in this market may not be aware the extent of Sharia parameters that are applicable to this ijarah. On the other hand, such activities also may create artificial demand, because you, to begin with, you hoard off all type of asset that you think the value can go up. You rent it out, sublet again, sublet triple or multiple times to create artificial demand, to create a perception of demand on that type of asset, so that the value continue to go up. Such anti-competitive behavior also is considered non-Sharia compliant. Fortunately, now we have Anti-Competition Act to further support prohibition against these activities, because this may deprive other genuine sublessee from getting a fair rental rate. That is not permissible from Sharia perspective. no new term can be predetermined to automatically take effect at the expiry of the ijarah. The reason for this is that you don't want to unfairly impose additional obligation on the lessee. It has to be mutually agreed, and therefore the parties at that stage, when there is an expiry of an ijarah, have to enter into a separate agreement, a fresh contract, so that this allow also for renegotiation, unless again you have mutually agreed to continue with the terms just to lock in your costs as much early. That is different. That's different. But for you to unilaterally impose as a lessor, unilaterally impose on the lessee that you must continue to rent until I find a new lessor, for example, that is not permissible. Now we go to the rental rate. What are the conditions applicable to the rental rates? We start from the 12 o'clock first. The rent must be paid on the agreed time. Especially a Muslim, they are bound by their words. There are clear rules and injunctions in the Sharia that Muslims are bound by their words, they are bound by their contract, and those who breach their promises are considered as hypocrites. And hypocrites, from the Sharia perspective, will be put into the lowest level of hell. That is how the Sharia described it. Whether we like it or not, that is the truth and that is the teachings of the religion. So that's why debt has to be paid and rent has to be paid as well. That is how serious Sharia look at it when it comes to payment obligation, especially when the payment is for a legitimate contract. The amount must be specific, must be clear, must be transparent to both parties, at least clearly precise and agreeable formula which do not create hidden costs. In other words, you may pre-agree on a formula on whether to increase or decrease the rental amount over a period of time throughout the tenure of the contract. But the formula must be clear and it is agreed by both parties. It cannot be a formula that will be unilaterally decided because that is ambiguous, and it cannot be a formula that only one party understands, for example. Again, that will be dubious ambiguity. So the price has to be certain and known to both parties, whether the quantum or by way of formula. The manner and method of paying the rent has to be agreed. In other words, you cannot leave that out. How you pay rent? Oh, I'll pay in cash or in kind. What kind? We decide in the future. That again, is a bit too unfair from Sharia perspective, because you leave it open, and this will create unfairness, lack of transparency to either party. When it comes to payment, it will basically open up huge dispute later on whether the payment in kind, what kind also is properly appraised or valued based on the proper consideration. So these are conditions that need to be complied with very carefully. And then the rental shall fall due from the date of the delivery, not from the date of signing the contract. This I have mentioned earlier. For example, if you have not owned your ship, you cannot start imposing the rental rate yet. You can only lease something that you already own. Therefore, you can start imposing the tenure or the rental tenure once you have owned and agreed for the tenure to start. In this respect, especially under certain type of ijarah, for example, ijarah mansufah fil azimah or ijarah muqadah ila mustaqbal, which is future or forward ijarah, the lessee can agree to pre-pay the rental before he start utilizing or start using the underlying asset. He can agree, but you cannot force it on him in the first place. It's different if he agrees to pay the rental early, and also you are restricted by the fact that you have not owned the asset. You can only start, even for prepayment or advance rental payment, you can only start imposing it once you have owned the asset. You cannot lease something that you do not pun yet. Yeah. Termination. What governs termination clause in ijarah? Of course, there's no issue when the termination is mutual, if both parties agree, because there is absolute freedom of contract in that respect. If both parties agree to terminate, you terminate. The question is whether you terminate by way of early settlement or because of default. What happens when it comes to early settlement? There is always an argument that if the lessee settle early the rental payment or the tenure of the contract, then the lessor will be incurring additional costs to repossess the asset, and to find new lessee, perhaps repair the asset first before he can find a new lessee. So in the modern era, people are much more calculative about the opportunity cost, what they call as opportunity cost when it comes to early termination. In many conventional leasing contract, for example, there is a penalty imposed even for prepayment. You prepay, we impose you penalty. You must pay only on time. Because if you pay early, we have additional cost to recalculate, what amount of interest is due. So, as a matter of factly, you need to be very clear that opportunity cost is not a concept that is recognized under ijarah and not recognized under Sharia. There must be actual costs. That's why, from the beginning, I've mentioned that any claim of compensation must be because of genuine cost or incurred costs or expenses. It cannot be out of the blue or just based on the argument of opportunity. No. Because again, it goes back to the basic. Al-ghurum bil-ghunum. You must take the risk. Then only you are entitled to gain. Any gain that is taken without taking risk is considered riba, i.e. unlawful gain. So to that extent, the formula is very simple. You need to be careful when it comes to taking any gain. There must be for adequate consideration. The lessee does not have to pay rental for the period when the asset is not used. This is to be fair to both parties. If I have paid my rental obligation up to the period when I use that asset, then I have no further obligation to pay for the period where I do not use it. Since I have resent the asset back to the lessor is at liberty to earn additional rental income by leasing it out to other parties. So there is no such thing as opportunity cost there from Sharia perspective, because you have gained back your asset. If you want to earn additional income, then you lease it out. There is no basis for you to enforce the lease further to lessee who have decided to settle early. And then, of course, some termination is because of the loss of the asset itself. In particular, due to the lessee's default. Let's say, for example, quite often, whether we like it or not, for example, when it comes to ship or aircraft leasing, the damage may not be done by the party who is the lessee himself, but by his agent. In other words, by his staff or by his employees, who causes, whether by way of misconduct or negligence, causes damage to the underlying asset, to the ship or to the aircraft. And because of that, you don't want this type of lessee. You don't want to continue to lease your asset to this type of lessee whereby his employee or staff continues to damage your property. And he negligently also do not want to maintain the asset properly or pay you compensation for it. So that's why, to this extent, lessor wants to terminate the ijarah contract early. In this respect, if by way of facts or evidence, the lessor can prove that the asset loss is due to the lessee's default, the lessee may have to pay for the full rental amount. So it depends on the evidence as well as the terms there, and shall compensate the lessor for the asset loss. Again, we have to look this as a proof of fairness of the principle of ijarah. Whether you incorporate this into the agreement or not, this is basically the underlying principle applicable to ijarah, and you have to abide by it. If the lease agreement was terminated prematurely at either party's request, how do you go about it? The lessor is entitled to rental for the period up to the stage where the lessee continue to use the property. For example, if he give you 2 months notice, 3 months notice, 1 year notice, so he will be entitled to continue to use the asset until that notice period is served. That notice period expires. Then the lessee will not have to pay further rental, and the rental paid for the period asset was not used will have to be returned. For example, if he has prepaid under ijarah masufah fi al-zimmah or ijarah muqabal ila mustaqbal, future or forward lease, that prepayment or advance rental payment where he has not used has to be returned, and then the parties must mutually agree to terminate the agreement, so that it's very clear that ownership, possession, control has been passed back to the owner, and the lessee is free to move on. In other words, the severance of the ties, the divorce of this contract must be very clearly and precisely done and documented. So, for illustration, this is a damaged ship whereby the cargo has fallen out, and therefore a lot of repair has to be done. Not only the lessor may be able to keep the rent paid for lapsed usage period, but also claim for compensation for major repairs, and then the lessee will have to pay the repair due from the damage the lessee was faulted, but he can also opt to seek termination of the contract and stop rental payment while arbitrating or arguing in court about how much compensation to pay from the damage. It is quite obvious from this photo that the ship is overweighted by cargo, so it's perhaps very clear negligence on the part of the lessee. So before we take a break, alhamdulillah we are just on time. I will just give you a glimpse of what we will be covering in the next session. The standardized ijarah documentation itself. As I have said, when we initiated this project, we were already looking into the application of this standardized version and its compatibility with the BIMCO standardized contracts, which are quite popular amongst lease companies in Labuan. Again, I reiterate that BIMCO stands for the Baltic and International Maritime Organization, BIMCO.org. If you would like to look into their examples, there are a range of standardized lease documentation, ship leasing documentation developed by BIMCO and quite widely used amongst leasing companies around the world. So we make full use of that because, for example, the arbitration clause in BIMCO is very good. The governing law clause is very clear. These are some of the useful terms that you can incorporate into the standardized ijarah documentation without much issues there. In other words, very minor tweak that will be required, but there are two versions that you need to be aware of. These are actually taken from actual documented transaction that has taken place in the market. On the one hand, we have a version which is a simplified version whereby it just barely complies with the basic requirements of ijarah parameters just now. As I've mentioned, conditions applicable to lessee, conditions applicable to lessor, conditions applicable to the asset itself, and the level of certainty required under the ijarah contract. The rest of it, you can incorporate terms from the BIMCO This is especially useful for leasing businesses or leasing transactions that takes place by way of volumes. If you need to replicate that contract on daily basis or on rapid basis, this is very useful. There is also a second version which are more lengthier. They incorporate many terms that are usually negotiated for very niche or specific type of assets, such as aircraft. For those of you who have been into aircraft leasing before, you'll be aware that when you enter into an aircraft leasing contract, firstly, most of the terms are negotiated. There are a lot of regulations, conventions internationally that you will be referring to and benchmark against. So, in other words, this is where it differs in the first place, because the first one is volume based and therefore non-negotiable. You just sign it up and execute it on volume basis. But the second one, it is negotiable, and therefore many of the terms are also to be carefully considered based on the actual underlying asset that you use. Secondly, although it may still incorporate BIMCO terms or BIMCO standard clauses, but you need to be careful that these are negotiable terms as well. On the one hand, you just borrow from BIMCO in order to minimize time and replicate standardized practice, but on the other hand, because of the uniqueness of the asset, it may be worth negotiating carefully as well some of these terms. Just bearing in mind, again, for example, when you are negotiating leasing of an aircraft, quite often you even break it up in terms of the risk and liabilities associated with the aircraft. You break it up into various components. For example, there will be dedicated clauses specific on the engines of the aircraft, because engines of the aircraft can be traded, can be replaced, can be repaired in all the various airports around the world. In fact, it can even be leased independently. The engine of the aircraft can be leased independently from the aircraft itself. So this is where we try to share our experience in aircraft leasing by coming up with a standardized format that you can learn from and consider, and hopefully will enable you to expand that usage of that negotiable contract in your transactions. Thank you very much for listening so far. If you have any question, I will probably allow a few minutes. Otherwise, we can defer it to the next session. Any question? Yes, please, sir.
What about you can't have the forward contracting?
We will discuss that next.
Later on?
Yeah, in the next one.
What about options again?
Options. There are permissible options. There are also impermissible options. We can discuss that in the next session. Yes. Yes, please.
You mentioned about the ownership of the asset.
Yes.
So what if the person, the vendor,
The lessor.
is actually in the process of acquiring
Yeah.
the asset?
Like I said, you are permitted to enter into the ijarah contract before you acquire the asset, in order to agree on the parameters or the basic terms and lock in that customer and lock in that pricing early, because there's a lot of commercial consideration coming in. But you cannot impose the rental payment yet until you have taken possession of the asset. Which means that there must still be satisfaction of the ownership before rental start. Yes, yes. In other words, again, you enter the contract early today, but you agree that you will obtain possession of the asset tomorrow, and the rental will only start the day after tomorrow. It cannot start tomorrow. Okay?
You can agree on the terms.
You can agree. You can agree. In other words, like I said, to the level that both parties can pre-agree on the terms of the conditions and satisfy all the terms, the broad parameters I've mentioned just now, as far as the lessee, the lessor, the underlying asset, and the certainty in terms of no hidden costs, that'll be fine. But you cannot, for example, purposefully enter into the contract to bind the customer first, but later on plan to impose a lot of hidden costs. That, for example, is not permissible. The options, for example, just now, it cannot just to reflect further on this particular question, it cannot deliberately create additional cost that is not foreseeable by both parties, whereby only one party deliberately incorporate that option with a lot of hidden costs in there, with the purpose of, on the one hand, tying in the lessee from the beginning, on the other hand, planning to impose of a lot of additional charges on him as the lease continues. That would not be fair to the lessee. Thank you very much for your question. Let's have a break for half an hour. I'll see you back at 11. Thank you.